to another episode of Jim's Allotment Garden. Okay, so I just want to do a few of the comments and questions that have come over. I know I've not done many this month. In fact, this is only the second one. But I just want to try and get through some of the comments and questions that have come over. The first one comes from Belinda Carpenter, and she was saying, can you grow dahlias in the shade? To all intents and purposes, yes you can. Dahlias are quite a versatile plant. You can grow them either in to the best of my knowledge, in direct sunlight or in dapple shade or in or in actual shade. They do, I believe, prefer sunlight for them to grow, but there's no reason to think that they won't grow in the shade. But it depends how bad the shade is. If it's partial shade, I don't think you're going to have a problem. But I grow my dahlias in the front garden, and there, as my house is north facing and I'm in the northern hemisphere, the majority of the time they're in the shadow of the house, and they grow quite well in the front garden. There's lots of people who grow them actually in the allotment. John next to me, he grows this down the bottom, that are in direct sunlight, and they always grow really well. I think they grow better in direct sunlight, but there's no reason to think you can't grow them in the shade. If you are going to go out and buy some dahlia bulbs to corms to put in the ground, what I would suggest is you read the label and make sure, because I think some varieties will probably do better in the shade than others. But that's probably the best bit of advice I can give you. I'm not an expert on growing dahlias. I have grown them for a number of years now, but I always tend to grow them in the same kind of position. And mine, I've not got a lot of experience of growing them in a lot of shade, but I think they'll be okay personally. The next questions come from Don's Allotment, Richard Sydenham and Mark Davidson, and they were also commenting on the video that I did about dahlias at the beginning of this month. And they were basically, this is the video where I was taking the root ball out of the ground and washing it and putting it in the greenhouse over winter to save them. The reason I do that is I have kept them in the ground in the past, but dependent on the weather that you have, if you have some quite bad frosts, they can get sort of killed off. Now, I kept dahlias years and years ago, and I always used to leave them in the ground, and unfortunately I lost them due to the frost in the winter. So what I've always done ever since is always dug them up and brought them in. And there's a secondary reason. I always like to dig the border over and dig a load of muck and stuff like that at the beginning of the year. So that's another reason to take them out, so I've got a clear ground. And when I'm always laying borders out, what I tend to do is have the perennial plants like the rhododendrons, the roses, and lavenders and stuff like that. I always tend to keep them to the edges or the back of the border, and then I always tend to put the either the annuals or the plants that come in and out like dahlias in middle to the front of the border, and that's why I always try to sort of do it that way. And what I tend to do is, for the perennials, I tend to mulch them. For the annuals and the perennials that go in and out of the ground, I tend to dig stuff in the ground. So that's I've found to get the best results, that's the way I do it. But yeah, Don, Richard and Mark were saying that they leave theirs in the ground, and what they do is they basically mulch over the plant with either muck or sawdust or straw or compost or whatever. And then the other thing you can do is to put over some plastic. Now, what the plastic does is it prevents the ground around the dahlia getting too wet. The reason for this is when it does freeze, the water molecules that are in the ground, the water that's in the ground, turn into like shards, and as they freeze, that's what damages the dahlia tubers, if you like, under the ground. Now, those are the bits of the plant that you need to basically survive over the winter, because next year it's this part that'll grow on again to make next year's plant. So if you are going to leave them in the ground, the best bits of advice I can give you is most certainly bury them deep. You know, you can put a dahlia plant, you know, the root system, quite deep in the ground. You know, you can go down a good sort of 9 inches or so, and the deeper it is, the more protected against the frost that it is. And as Don, Richard and Mark have said, you know, what you can do is mulch over the ground. I'm not quite sure which one it was. I think it was possibly Don said that he put some net over to stop the cats scratching at the you know, the mulch that you put on the top. But yeah, what I would suggest is you put you know, put some compost, or some, you know, well rotted compost, or some muck or whatever, and build it up. And then, you know, sort of cover that over with a little bit of plastic or something like that. It doesn't look particularly brilliant in the, you know, the winter, but you know, that's what you can do to best protect them, if you like. The other thing you can do is possibly another suggestion is put on green, you know, sort of grass cuttings or whatever, and as they break down, they'll stay warm, and they'll sort of, you know, bring a bit of warmth to the ground. Don't put too much on, obviously, because that'll obviously make it too hot, and then the dahlias may be fooled into thinking it's spring and they'll start to grow, which obviously, you know, you want to avoid. But you know, if you are going to keep them in the ground, bury them deep when you first put them in, and then sort of mulch over and put some plastic over or something like that. That's the best possible way that you can protect them. But for the last 5 or 6 years, you know, we've had very mild winters, and I'm not quite sure what we're going to have this year. You never really know in the UK. We have been predicted quite a severe winter this year, but they predicted a severe winter not last year, the year before, and it was quite mild, so you never really know. But yeah, if you are going to keep them in the ground, that's the best bit of advice I can give you. Next question comes from David Juice, and he says, what's the new crops you're going to grow next year? Right, I have been thinking about this quite a lot, and what I will do is, obviously in the spring, I'll do another episode explaining in a bit more detail. But there's a few things that I'm thinking of growing that I haven't grown before, and stuff that I haven't grown for a while. So the things that I haven't grown before is there's a variety of broccoli, which is the species of broccoli. One of the species of broccoli. Now, just to explain what I'm saying here, species are the plants that kind of grew naturally, as in Mother Nature made them, if you like. So these are the plants that have evolved over the years before we really started cultivating plants. And these are the plants that the varieties that we enjoy today have basically, that they're the descendants of these species, if you like. So, but the one thing that you get with species is they're not typically the varieties that we grow have been derived because they've got some property or some strength or some immunity to disease, or all of these properties that man's bred into by cross-pollinating various plants, species or varieties, to get a particular strain which grows well in whatever environment and is resistant against disease and gives you a good crop and all that kind of business. The species are the original plant, and when you derive varieties, man-made varieties, there is a trade-off. You do tend to lose something, either it be flavour or something, I don't know. It depends on the plant. Now, this species of broccoli was, I think it's original. I'm not quite sure. I need to have a word with my friend who grew it this year for the first time. I'm not sure if it originates in Greece or in Egypt. I can't remember which one it is, but basically they still grow it over there, and it's a bush that grows around kind of 4 foot high, and it's if you saw it, you wouldn't think it was broccoli at all. The leaves are quite small. They're not like the brassicas that we're used to. The leaves are quite sort of quite pointed. They don't have the typical sort of broccoli leaf, and they are classed as semi-hardy perennials. So you can potentially grow them for a number of years. and it's a bush that grows, as I say, about 4 foot high, about 2 foot across. And what you do, very much like the way that we pick tea, where you cut the tips off and eat those. That's exactly what you do. So you go around and you cut the tips off. Tips quite small; they're only like my little finger. You tend to cut off the top sort of 2 inches, and then that pushes out again, and then you just keep cutting at it all through the season. And then at the end of the year, it dies back. You cut it off the ground, and then it grows again next year. But Terry, the bloke who's actually grown it this year, said to me that it's one crop that he's tried, and that he's really enjoyed doing it. And he says, and the cropping of it is unbelievable. You can just keep cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting at it. And he said it's a really nice green. It's very tasty. It's quite tender. There's a variety of ways you can cut. It's exactly like you do with normal broccoli. But he said it's nice with pasta dishes, or it's nice with as a side vegetable. And he's used it in a variety of ways, bakes and stuff like that. So that's most certainly one variety that I'm going to grow next year. That's one species I'm going to grow next year, should I say. That's one plant. The next thing I'm going to have a try of comes from a comment that Tina left from Allotment Upcycling. And this is something else that I've never grown before, and I was quite intrigued. Done a bit of research on the internet over the past couple of weeks, and the plant is okra, OCA. So if you search on Google OCA, it'll come up. There's various pictures, but it's like it looks similar to either a Jerusalem artichoke sort of type of tuber, or it looks a little bit like ginger as well, or kind of sweet potatoes, that kind of thing. It's not a potato, but it's a plant. I'm not quite sure if it's part of the Deadly Nightshade group of plants, but it's a tuber about the size of your finger, probably about 1.25 inches or so across, and basically they grow, and they make all these tubers in the ground. And you dig them up like potatoes, and use it as boil it up and use it as a vegetable. There are, from the research that I've done, there are a number of ways you can grow these things. As I say, I've never grown these before. And to be perfectly honest with you, until Tina sent me the comment, I was blissfully unaware of these things. I don't know anybody who's ever grown these before, at least to my knowledge. But I'm most certainly going to give them a go next year. I think I'll grow probably a row of those to see how we get on. But I'm going to be searching on the internet to see the best way to grow it. So one question back to everybody is, if you have grown okra before, I know Tina's grown it. I would be interested to understand how you've grown it in the past. I think you grow it pretty much like sweet potatoes. You plant them in a row, probably about 6 inches down or so, and then you just let them grow, and then obviously they sort of send out various roots and do it that way. But I'm not 100% sure from the research that I've done. There's quite a few people that grow them in tubs. There's quite a few people who like Mark Davidson grows his potatoes. They grow them in containers and do that. But I'd be interested to understand how people have grown them in the past. Maybe they're more popular in other countries, I'm not quite sure. But how you've grown them, in what conditions, what they like. Do they like a lot of water, a bit of water? I would imagine they like a reasonable amount of water, because they're starchy tubers. But be interested to find out as well how you cooked them in the past, if you have grown these. They're most certainly not well known in the UK. So yeah, if anybody's got any advice on that, I'd really appreciate your comments. So that's okra, OCA, if you didn't put that up before. The other things I'm going to be doing next year, which I have done in the past, I'm going to be growing some Birdhouse gourds. I'm going to be growing some more Birdhouse gourds. You can't eat these things. They're a really interesting plant to grow. They're a good cropper, and obviously, as the name implies, you can make birdhouses out of the fruit. Very much like butternut squash, that kind of thing, but a little bit more elongated. There's a few different versions. You can get one that kind of goes out again at the top, and you can make a couple of things out of them. Well, more than a couple of things actually. But a birdhouse is obviously one obvious one that you can make, as I made earlier in the year, which I've yet to finish. You can also make maracas out of them if you've got any kids, or grandkids, you know, you can make, if you dry them out, the seeds will release on the side, and you can basically make maracas out of them. You can also make water carrying bottles out of them, if you like, or you know, you can also make drinking vessels. There's a whole raft of things, but obviously the obvious ones that you'd use them for in the the developed countries, most certainly you'd make birdhouses out of them and maracas for the kids, sort of thing. So that's one thing I'm going to grow next year, and I'm going to be growing these up the back fence. So the Harrison fencing that I've been taking apart, I'm going to be using some of that mesh to put a mesh across the back fence here, and I'm going to be growing them behind the herbs up against that wall, so they've got a nice bit of sun, so they'll be south facing. I can also, you know, sort of keep them well watered, and so I'll be growing some of those next year. Also going to be growing a few more gourds. I grew too many courgettes again this year, I think. I'm guilty of this a few times. I do tend to grow too many courgettes because I can give them to the chickens as well, you see. So that, you know, it's a nice thing to give to the chickens because they enjoy them. But I think I'll grow less courgettes than I did this year, and I'll grow some more different types of gourds and squashes than I have done before. Also in the same family, I believe they're the same family, I'm going to be growing some okra, which is the Indian vegetable. It's like it looks a little bit like if you've never seen it before, it's kind of finger-sized green vegetable, and it has got a slight sort of bittery taste. It's not quite bitter, but it's, you know, it's not as sweet, and they're good for curries and things like that. You can also pickle them. So I'm going to grow a few of those plants. I believe it's in the gourd family. I'm not 100% sure, but it most certainly looks like a gourd. So I'm reasonably sure that it is. Again, I've not grown these before, so I'm going to be giving that a go. So that's okra. It's also called lady's fingers. So yeah, I'm going to give that a go. They're small, green, sort of reasonably pointed. They look a little bit like gherkins. They're about kind of 5 or 6 inches long. Quite popular in Indian cooking. So I'm going to be giving those a go. Again, tomatoes, I'm going to be growing a few more varieties than I've done in the past. Obviously, I'll be continuing with my staple money maker. I always grow plenty of those because those are the ones I like to whiz up for the pasta sauces and stuff like that, and they're nice on sandwiches. I'll be growing other varieties as well. I've got a rainbow F1 variety, which is it's multicoloured. There's like red, orange, yellow, purple, different colours in there. So I'll be growing some of those. I'm hoping to put another greenhouse in next year, so in there will be more tomatoes and potentially also sweet potatoes at the bottom. So that's something else I'm planning to do next year. Excuse me. Next comment comes from Sandy M, and she was talking about tomatoes, and she said, do you know anybody that's had any success with Crimson Crush, which is a blight-resistant tomato that's grown outside? Sandy, I do grow tomatoes outside. Normally I have them down in the garden, to be honest with you, by the house, but this year I've had them up in the allotment. I've had them up the side of the asparagus here this year. Unfortunately, I got blight. There wasn't much blight this year, but I was lucky enough to get some. But the varieties that I grow outside, there was some moneymaker that were left over from the greenhouse, and I also grew the Gardener's World competition seeds, which also unfortunately got blight. There is no tomato plant which is immune to blight. You only get the blight-resistant varieties. So if you are going to grow them outside, I would suggest, obviously blight is airborne, so if you can, it's a trade-off. But what you want to do is get them in an area that's not too damp, that you get a reasonable amount of airflow, but you also want to try and keep them away from anybody else's deadly nightshade plants like potatoes, tomatoes and stuff like that. So that if there is blight that goes through, yours are far enough away to not pick up the spores, which is basically, blight is a fungus. So basically you're trying to keep your plants away from other people's. Obviously on an allotment where it's open plan, you've got almost no chance of doing that. And obviously if you do ever get blight on any of your plants, to be fair to everybody else, you know, take the tops off straight away. and then bag up the the infected parts that have got the spores on before it gets too far. Wash your hands, put them in the recycling bin or the bin or wherever, and then don't compost them, whatever you do. And then wash your hands before you go back to your greenhouse or your allotment, because you'll be covered in the spores. These things are minuscule, and you'll be literally covered in them. So most certainly wash your hands. Make sure you've have the least amount of contact with it, and just get rid of it. That's the best thing to do. Blight will spread like wildfire. The times you need to be looking for it are things like July, when it's been raining, because then it's high humidity, and those are the conditions that you need for blight to spread like wildfire. So that's the time you need to look at them. So obviously keeping a reasonable amount of airflow through your plants, and so they dry out quickly, so you reduce the chance of getting blight. But yeah, coming back to your question, Sandy, I did digress slightly there. One of my friends over the side there, he grew Crimson Crush this year. He had really good success with it, no blight at all, and he had a really good crop of tomatoes off there. And he said that they were, they were nice, tasty fruit, and they're obviously quite attractive as well. So yeah, they do come recommended. They are pretty blight resistant, and I know John had quite a bit of success. He grew 12 plants outside in he got some corrugated plastic and made like like an enclosed area, and he had them all inside there. He did have other varieties in there, but I think he had about a dozen Crimson Crush. He had a good crop off them, so they're a good cropper, they're a nice tasty fruit, and they're also attractive on the plate. So yeah, they do come recommended. You grow them pretty much like any other tomato, to be honest with you, but yeah, they're a good variety to go for. Steve Butler asked about the parsnip competition, or the comparison of the 5 different parsnips that I did. I am going to do an episode on this in the very near future. I will be digging up parsnips most certainly in the next week, and as you know, there were 5 different varieties that I grew, and I germinated them in 3 different ways. I put the seed directly into the ground in a drill, the more traditional way of doing it, and just watered those and covered them with plastic. I also germinated them in the parsnip propagator thing, the pipes, if you remember. I grew them in there, and I also chitted them in some trays with some wet tissue paper under them. And so I've got 5. Actually, there's 3 varieties in the ground now, because if you remember, 2 of them completely failed. So there's actually 3 varieties. I'm trying to remember. I know Albion is one. I can remember West Bromwich Albion. Albion is one. Arrow is another, and there's a third one. It doesn't quite come to mind. It's one of the older varieties that I've used before. But those are most certainly Albion and Arrow, 2 of them. I'm trying to think of the third one. I can't remember. I'll have a look through my notes and I'll put a comment at the bottom of the video. But yeah, those are the 3. 2 of the varieties that I tried. The other one came from Wilco's, and it was called Parsnip White something. And that just didn't germinate at all. I put some in the ground, and I put some in the propagator, the parsnip propagator, and I also tried to chit some. It might have been a bad batch of seeds, I don't know, and it's no slant on Wilco seeds at all, because they're normally really good. But for some reason, it was more likely not the weather, because we had strange weather, if you remember. We had warm, then cold, and we were having a reasonable amount of plants damping off and getting waterlogged, because I was giving them a bit of water because they were dry, and then the following day it'd be cold and muggy, so they'd be sitting in the water as opposed to it drying off. So that's likely to be the answer. So I don't know if this is quite a fair test, most certainly in that respect. But having said that, all the seeds were done together in exactly the same way. Some survived, some didn't, but some were possibly a little bit more resistant to the rapid changes in temperature than we had at the beginning of the year. But what I'll be doing, I'll probably put an episode out later in the week. A quick Christmas video. And what I will be doing is digging up some of the parsnips. So all being well in the next week, I'll most certainly be digging some up for Christmas. So, but what I like to do is with parsnips, I always like to have a good frost first. And what that does is it changes the starches in the parsnip to sugar, so that the parsnip becomes sweeter. So normally what I do is I leave the parsnips in the ground until we've had a good frost, and then that causes this chemical reaction inside the parsnip, which changes the starch to sugar, and that makes, you know, for a better, sweeter parsnip. So that's what I normally do. But we haven't had a frost properly yet. We have had a slight frost, but we haven't had the low temperatures that we were expecting to have in December. So I am digging them up a little bit early, but that's what I've been waiting for. I was planning to have done it by now, but because we haven't had the frost, I've had to delay that episode where I'm making the acid test comparison, if you like. But I will dig some up. I know I don't want to sort of preempt anything, so I've not dug it up yet. And parsnips are like potatoes; you don't know what you got till you dig them up. You can have a nice big top like that, and then dig the parsnip up, and it's that long. Or you can have something that doesn't look so impressive, but it's a nice long parsnip. And I'll be marking them on a number of different factors. Obviously, how straight the root is, that's something that I'm quite interested in with regard to the ones that were chitted in the trays, because I think that could possibly damage the root, and also the ones that were done in the propagator could also have damaged roots. So that's obviously, you know, something I'm quite interested in. The ones that were planted in the ground, they're a surefire bet unless they've hit a stone. They're going to be nice and long parsnips. So yeah, I will be doing that possibly next week. It depends on what time I get and what the results are like. But it's more likely to be in January when we've had a good frost. That's when I'll discuss that, Steve. But there are quite a few well tried and tested varieties of parsnip out there. But if you're growing, you said this year was the first year for growing them. The best bit of advice I can give you is get 3 different varieties of parsnip seed. Yeah, go to your go to the internet or your garden centre or wherever, and pick out 3 different varieties of parsnip, and then sow all 3 varieties into the row, and then you are most certainly edging your bets to get them germinated and to grow. But that's up until this year, that's what I always did, and I've always had good results. So do your dig the ground over as nice and deep. Get the ground all nice and loose, and so it's it's nice and so it breaks up in your hand. And then don't walk on the ground wherever you do. And then put the drill in. You plant them about 1 inch or so down, or perhaps half an inch down, and then put in 3 different varieties all up the one row, not in separate sections. Put one variety up the row, and then put another variety up the row on top of those. So you've got 3 variety of seeds mixed together in the ground when you drill. And then if one fails or not, you'll always get parsnips coming up, and then obviously you can thin them out. You don't know which ones are which, obviously, as soon as they've grown. But if you want good success with parsnip, dependent on the weather, I've put in different varieties in the past. Some have done really well one year. The next year they completely fail. Other years, I've had some that have grown which haven't done particularly well. They've grown, but they're not particularly big. Other years, exactly the same variety has grown really nice, nice sized parsnips. And so a lot of it's down to the weather. So putting 3 varieties in, you've got you're edging your bets to get a good crop, basically. Next comment comes from Tina, and she was saying about she's going to send me some okra tubers, I'm assuming. So I don't think you grow them from seed, but anyway, I will be growing them next year. As I've explained in the previous comment from Dave Jewis. But thank you, Tina, very much. And the last question comes from Rovnos, which was from the questions, the garden, the allotment challenge questions that I put out last week. He was saying that one question would be, what's your favourite? What are your favourite crops to grow? And you are right, potatoes are a good one, because you never really know what you're going to get till you dig them out. But the one I thought about your question, and I think the one crop that I like to grow probably more than anything is spinach. Spinach has always been a favourite vegetable of mine, and and I think it's probably my favourite crop because I like spinach so much. But I don't grow spinach, normal spinach. I grow perpetual spinach, which is actually I think it's a brassica or a chard. Yeah, I like spinach as a vegetable. I just like eating it, and I know spinach is really good for you. And I've liked it ever since I was a small child. So if I was to say a favourite crop, it'd have to be spinach or spinach beet or perpetual spinach. The other crops that I like growing, I like asparagus. I do like asparagus. I like eating asparagus. So that's another crop that I like growing. It's nice to have the fruit as well, to be honest with you. I do like growing the fruit. It's nice to come up and just grab a handful of strawberries or raspberries or sort of whatever, and just eat them on my way up to the plot. I do like doing that. And I think quite possibly one of the most satisfying crops to grow are tomatoes, to be honest with you, because with such a small space. I mean, this greenhouse is kind of 10 foot by 8 foot, so I've got these two borders in here, and when you think the sheer volume of tomatoes that I grow in just this small area, it's amazing how many tomatoes you can grow. And tomatoes are really good for you. There's a lot of antioxidants in there, and there's a lot of blogs on the internet to say that tomatoes are really good against things like cancer and all these good things. And you can use tomatoes in such a diverse way. There's so many different dishes you can plant. You can cook in the kitchen with tomatoes, and if you've got a fresh stock of tomatoes in your greenhouse for most of the year round, you can pretty much put tomatoes with anything. You can put a side salad, right from that all the way through to doing sauces and stuff like that with them. So growing tomatoes is very satisfying and sort of favourite crop to grow as well. But if I was to answer that question, Ravnos, that would probably be my answer.
So, I hope this episode of Jim's Lot of Garden has been of some use to you. Please don't hesitate to put any questions or comments that you've got below, and I'll always get back to you. And I'll see you on the next episode of Jim's Lot of Garden.